If they don't know who they are and whose they are, they're constantly trying to earn your love and affection. And you cannot tell them about unconditional love that the Father has for them if they don't see that unconditional love in you first. And that begins with unconditionally letting them know they are your beloved son or daughter in that process.
Well, we're doing it. This is our very first episode.
Number one.
Raising Young Disciples podcast, where we talk about
Raising young disciples.
Basically the goal of this series is just to be able to find that balance, the combination of seeing children love God, know God, and grow in their faith. And we want to have conversations about that because that's a big deal. I am Mary Jo.
Yep.
And then sitting next to me is my friend, my coworker, my co-host, Daniel.
Yeah. I'm Daniel, and one of the reasons Mary Jo and I are here is because we're on two kind of ends of the spectrum when it comes to parenting. So Mary Jo, younger kids, right?
Yes, I have a just turned 1-year-old, baby girl, and then I have a 3.5-year-old son right now. So
I don't know why I asked it like a question.
Mary Jo?
Because I know, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't you have young kids?
You have young kids?
I know
Yeah.
them.
We don't
I've
talk
met
about
them.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
They are lovely, and it's definitely a beautiful season of my life. It's also still feels new. I'm learning to have these conversations about the Bible, about God, and my 3-year-old is asking interesting questions. And when he was 2, I would say they were harder questions because the amount of cognitive growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Each season for these children is amazing, especially in that sort of like toddler stage to see that. But as we enter, I think the age group that we're looking at on this podcast is the 5-year-old and up.
Yep.
And so being able to, as a mom of a 3.5 and a 1-year-old, to think ahead, to see how I can start discipling now, but also just be intentional with building that future for them.
Yep.
And what about you?
Yep. So 16-year-old, 14-year-old, and 12-year-old.
Wow.
So 2 boys and a girl. And it's a whole different world in so many ways. My son just got his first car, which his grandparents helped him get. And so then we started paying for insurance, and that was way more than I expected. But beyond like just those types of changes, the types of conversations that we have are just deeper. And I've been working on this kind of manhood journey for both of my boys of walking through what does it look like to be a man, and have this kind of somewhat of a homegrown curriculum that we've been working through, which has been really fun. But definitely on the teenage side, thinking about college and all that. But I think that's one of the things that makes this project kind of fun is the fact that really we're just here so we can grow in our ability to disciple our kids. Yeah. And we get the opportunity to talk with some really cool people throughout this on lots of different topics, on why intergenerational discipleship matters, on
what intergenerational discipleship means.
We should start with some definitions, inviting all generations to be together within church settings. We get to talk about grandparenting. I mean, there's going to be a lot of like what it looks like to be a single parent, or blended families. So there's going to be a lot of fun, hopefully, in this. I think we'll have fun either way. And today we really want to start talking about like intergenerational. With the definition, actually. Yeah. So the idea of multiple generations coming together and growing in faith together, because one of the things that's great about raising kids is how much you grow too as a parent. And this is not just how do we disciple young children, we're also going to be discipled as we disciple, which is a huge part of it. Which is why we're excited to have Chuck Stecker with us. So Chuck, welcome to Raising Young Disciples. I still got to get the name right there. And so just introduce yourself to us. I know you've got some military background. I know you got a PhD. You've been involved in Promise Keepers. You're a part of a chosen generation. So just give us a little snapshot of who you are and your family.
Got it. Well, thank you. What a privilege and an honor to be here with you. Got to tell you, getting to meet the two of you and hearing a little of your stories when you talked about being on the opposite ends of the spectrum. I kind of am too. My children run from the 40s to the 50s. My grandchildren started the 3-year-old and worked their way up into their 30s. So
nice.
I've got all of your spectrums right there with me. I've experienced the highs and the lows in a sense. Well, again, my name is Chuck Stecker. What a thrill. I am the executive director founder of a ministry called A Chosen Generation. That's what drew me into the intergenerational business. Little did I know that years before that, God had me focused on intergenerational because I was just trying to raise a family in the direction that I wanted my kids to go. No thoughts of grandkids at that point. I was still just trying to get through having kids, in that process. But through that, in a multiple different settings, I did serve in the military for about 23 years. No, I was not a chaplain. Most of my time was spent in special operations with a couple of Ranger battalions and special forces, Green Berets, and that. Had a stint in the Pentagon that was pretty, it was actually a great experience for all of our family. But in any event, God led us into the ministry out of the military in 1994. Retired from the military, and I'd had this brush, if you will, with this emerging ministry called Promise Keepers. And that had happened a couple of years earlier in 92. But then God opened the door. We retired, moved there, and became one of the regional directors, initial ones, with that ministry that was exploding at the time. My wife and I, kids, we knew it was a season that wasn't where we were going to spend a lifetime, but it was kind of just get on the path and God would guide us. And in 1997, it was very clear that it was time to step away, launched a ministry, a little bit of the focus on the rites of passage because age of our boys at that time and so forth. But that would lead us then in 2000 to redirect that, which became really the crux of the intergenerational part of our life in terms of teaching, preparing resources and things like that. I would say God's been very good. Obviously, you mentioned I've got a PhD, which for a guy that barely got through high school, that was pretty amazing. But in the midst of that, but allowed us to be across the nation and have impact in 15 or more different countries. Just sent materials off to Paraguay yesterday on intergenerational spiritual fathers and things like that.
Cool.
So that's it. I just was reading Paul this morning in Ephesians when he said, I'm the least of the least, and so forth. And so the opportunity to be a part of the foundational effort that is being made at ODBM there on raising young, this podcast is a part of the raising young disciples. It's humbling. Very much an honor, and I'm blessed to be a part of it. Hope to contribute to where you believe God is taking us in this process.
So talk a little bit about your family journey and specifically like early on thinking through discipleship of your own kids. What did that look like for you? How intentional were you with that at the beginning? Is that something you had to grow in? Kind of share some of that with us.
Wow, that's a great question. So I'm going to tell you, having listened to the two of you, your background there, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I came from a family that did not go to church. So in 7th grade, started going to a youth group that would lead me into going to church, but honestly had no understanding whatsoever of discipleship. It was really about good behavior more than anything. Just be a good person, okay? This would lead me down a path that I was married, divorced, daughter in her 50s, okay? 7 years ago, she was in her 40s, but let that go. That's to be anything. Just an amazing woman of God that, through a lot of things that I've learned in the process, we've learned as a family. But when I got married again, my wife had grown up in the church. I had not. We came together, neither one of us totally walking with the Lord. I tell people that, she drifted just far enough away to meet me, because if she was truly walking with the Lord, the only place she would have met me was outside the officers club when it closed, handing out tracts, asking me if I knew where I was going to go when I died. Okay. But through a series of things of people that cared deeply, a lot of issues in my life with alcohol and things like that, God brought us through all of that. We're in our 49th year of marriage, and God, it truly is a God story. So let's come back to this. And the intergenerational, God moved me into that because I knew that God had a plan, particularly for our two sons at a very young age, to come into godly manhood. I knew their father, their earthly father, was dumber than a rock because I looked at that guy every morning when I shaved. So I sought help. What do I need to do? And this issue of rites of passage, that there is a transitional process from childhood to adulthood. And by the way, it doesn't include adolescence. That's a term that was made up in 1904, right? Which kind of means you're not responsible for what you do if you study the word and the source of it and so forth. And so this transition, well, I started doing that because I wanted to raise two godly sons, wanted to pour into my daughter, and then ultimately be able to do this with grandkids. That's what led us into this path that said there's more to this than you think you understand. And God just kind of grabbed a hold of me and then reflected back on the things that I had done previous. And one of those was we had started a men's group on the East Coast at a church we belonged to. We started a fifth and sixth grade youth group, not a Sunday school, a youth group for fifth and sixth graders. Most critical, important thing I think I'd ever done. Incredible with that age there. But then it led us to starting a men's ministry where dads could bring their sons. When we use the word generation, we do that culturally to divide us by age. When God uses the word generations, he doesn't. He uses the word generations to unite us. That is every adult of responsible age. We're all in this together. So by God's perspective, Mary Jo, Daniel, we're in this thing together as one generation. So that's what we've been doing for 25 years, trying to help people understand, leaders focusing on that, the power and the importance from God's perspective of developing an intergenerational culture, what that means, what it looks like, walks like, and talks like, and the importance on every element of our one generation, as we say.
Yeah. So
I don't know if that makes it clear or muddies the water for us on this.
Well, I'd love to hear some of the things that you taught and walked through with your boys. How old were they when you started that journey with them? And what was the content that you guys were talking about?
The interesting thing is, and I'm going to throw this out, if there's dads listening out there, one of the biggest issue with dads is we feel so unqualified. All of these other people are spiritually stronger. Moms, back years ago, they got to go to Bible studies and all that. Us guys, we were the hunter provider. We worked on it. We came home, and all of the spiritual development was done really by the mom at that, and we took them to church for it. My wife would take them, tuck them in. I'd pray with them. Then I'd go back to reading my book or whatever. She'd take them to bed. She'd nurture them. She'd pray with them. And when God got a hold of me, I go, wait a minute, I've got a responsibility here. So when you say what I did for them, number one thing is trying to reinforce their identity, because that had been such a difficult thing for me, and to pray with them. But I want to tell you the third thing out here that really for me was I had to get help. I wanted my sons, my children, to be around other godly people because I wanted them to see faith in action. And to me, one of the greatest problems in the church was, a lot of churches, we draw more people to us likeness than Christ likeness. If we raise our hands, they raise theirs. If we speak with the same word, but it doesn't affect anything on Monday morning where they live, work, study, and play. I wanted my sons to be around. And very often they were the youngest one at, first grade and third grade, second grade and fourth grades. But I drug them every place. They got up and did men's ministry. They were around these great men that I wanted them to see. So as I was helping my sons learn that, I was learning from them. So for dads out there that said, man, I just need some help in this, you need help in this, Dad. And there are men around that you want your sons, and listen, your daughters. So often we think it's a father-son issue. It's a father to his children issue. God doesn't say anywhere in the Bible that I'm aware of, dads, you raise your sons, ignore your daughters, and let the moms raise them. And at some time, they'll be a perfect wife and your sons will be a perfect husband. I don't see it. He says he commands us to teach our children. That's Psalm 78, verses 5 through 7, which is really the legacy verses. You know, forefathers are commanded to teach their children. So in turn, their children would teach their children. And then it even says, and even generations yet to be born will arise and teach their children. And then God doesn't leave us hanging, by the way. If you go to Psalm 78, verse 7, it says that they will trust, remember, and obey the living God. And so often we miss that's what God's calling us to nurture, raise young disciples by teaching them to trust, remember, and obey the living God. But I got to tell you, they got to see it in us too. And that's very often where the disconnect happens there. Okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Now I'm doing it with my grandchildren, by the way.
Well, good. I'm curious, Chuck, because I know we've been talking about the father, and I can't fully relate to the father side of it as a mother. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question, because you were referencing bringing your sons and having them around others that like to influence, that have good character. Mm-hmm. And that could be like a Bible study where the kids are showing up to your men's Bible study. So for the moms in this story that often have the children with them, and in their need, having a space like a women's Bible study also gives them a moment of peace when there's daycare provided. How do you balance like having children seeing the intergenerational community while also giving the moms a space where they can have...
This feels like a very personal question right now.
I'm fine. Where they can...
Spit it out, Mary Jo. Spit it out. Tell me what you're asking.
I know. I'm trying to use the right words here, too. But like...
we'll work it out.
I know like Momco, they have things set up where there's daycare provided so that the moms can come together and have fellowship. Yeah. And that is specifically... I think that's intergenerational. You don't have to be a young person in that. You can just have young children. But how do we balance this need to be a healthy person and have that recharge time with other people, and your kids sometimes being part of it and sometimes not being part of it? Does that make sense?
Great question. I understood exactly, I believe, where you're heading. Look, when you said, I take my sons to the Bible study, that's not what I took them to. I took them to men's activities where there was activity for them. They didn't sit around in a Bible study with me because, one, it reduced my capability to be honest in front of other men when I had a second grader and a fourth grader and so forth. I believe very strongly in all the ministries of the church. Moms need a place. MOPS is located here. You know, Mothers of Preschoolers is located in the Denver International, so forth. We need our gender specific, our generational or age specific or special needs. Now, here's the problem, okay? All of those are needed, but what's happened is the larger the church grows, the more we divide by age, gender, and special needs. Now, specifically in children and youth ministry, now we're seeing the same thing with seniors, which I don't like the word senior. Okay, we call them the encore generation. We may need to do a different one just with encore, but those are very much needed, but they were never meant to be the church. They were meant to be a subset ministry of the church. What you've identified, and I can see your face, Mary Jo, you desperately need that time with other mothers.
It's showing.
Look, Daniel needs that time with other dads that's got teenagers. I had a dad come up to me at church who I care for deeply, his daughter, and he said, man, you got to pray for me. She's getting her driver's license. I said, how's she doing? She says, she's doing great. I'm scared to death. Okay. And he said, but she doesn't want me to drive with her that much. I said, look, then what you do is you get other people to ride with her and just be a friend to her. Okay. So we need these times where we come together. You use the word single mom. Let's go back to that for just a second. Single moms need help with both sons and daughters. Okay. Those daughters need the affirmation of that spiritual father image. Those sons need to be around it. Okay. But here's the deal with that. That doesn't mean you've got to take every activity in your life and say, oh my gosh, until they're 21, I just got to do everything with them. I have no peace. No, you'll kill yourself. Emotionally, you will kill yourself spiritually. But you look for opportunities. That's where the church comes in.
Mm-hmm.
The importance of the church being an intergenerational, vibrant body of Christ is so important because it does present those opportunities and the things that we can do together. Let's just look at intergenerational for just a second. So there's clarity out there. There's cross-generational, multi-generational, and intergenerational. Okay. You will see in churches and studies and so forth, they'll go, yeah, it's multi-generational, it's intergenerational, it's all the same. No, it's not. Cross-generational is a marketing term where you're trying to maintain market share in the next generation. That's what you're trying to do. You get what you market to. Multi-generational is simply a gathering or an event that draws people from all different ages. But keep in mind, at multi-generational, it's all center stage focus. I live in Denver. That's the Broncos. I used to go to baseball games where you could talk between innings. Not anymore. It's all center stage focus. They're there, to get people in the seats for the next game too. You see what I'm saying? Intergenerational has a specific issue of creating a safe place for the development of relationships. Cross-generational is not developing the relationships. It's drawing you in. Marketing. Multi-generational, they're trying to sell tickets to the next game and that. Intergenerational is focused specifically on developing a safe place that fosters and nurtures intergenerational relationships for the health of everybody involved. And that's one of the things with people calling themselves intergenerational. And, we finally see after 25 years, studies and so forth, but too often you see the intergenerational and it's focused only on drawing people to a specific segment of that generation to make them healthy. We see it with kids. Everything is about bringing people to serve the kids. They don't address the intergenerational needs of the people serving and the value there. We see the same thing on the other end of the spectrum where we've got what we call the encore generation there, where everything is focused on making them healthy. It's not a regard for the relationships. It comes in there. Truly intergenerational culture is about developing and fostering the relationships that are going to lead to stronger faith connections in that process. Discipleship is the word.
Yeah. I think about sticky faith. So having 4 or 5 key adults in a child's life and how likely they are to keep walking in their faith if they have those key adults that they've outside of their parents that they've connected with. And you've talked about that with having mentorship is a pretty key part of the journey for your boys, but then also just in general, how important that is. I want to circle back to you. You talked about for your own sons, the starting place of identity as being an important place to start and reinforcing that as an idea.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What is our identity that we should be so tied to and passing on to younger generations?
Boy, what a great question, Daniel. Let me tell you. So here's what we do within the ministry of a chosen generation is trying to help churches understand this discipleship process that begins with spiritual identity. Spiritual identity is to know who you are and whose you are. There is that relationship, okay? And look, God said, this is my, whose, beloved son, who? This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. Boy, that's something a lot of kids have never heard from their parents. Mm-hmm. You are my beloved son. You are my beloved daughter. That connection, right? And you know what's in us is, as parents, that is spiritually already seeded in us. The moment we have a child, what's the first thing that we want to know? We want this kid to be able to say daddy or mommy. And what do we say? Who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? Well, God's been saying that since before we were ever created. Who's your daddy, right? So here's the deal. For our kids to identify with God, to know their identity in Christ. And, it doesn't come easy, Daniel. I was in my 40s in vocational ministry, and God just kind of worked me over to be able to say, because we identify ourselves by what we do and who we know. what we've accomplished and what we own. But God says, but who truly are you? And I was in my 40s, and I could tell you, finally, people say, Chuck, who are you? To say, I am Chuck Stecker. I'm a blood-bought child of the living God. I've been adopted by the King into the royal family as one of his very own. My pictures I did in kindergarten are on his refrigerator. He's showing everybody that comes through. You understand? That's who I am. And until I get that right, I can't be Billy's husband. I can't be Chad Courtney or Lori's dad. I can't be Wheeler or Reed or Michaela's papa. I got to know who I am, or I sow that seed of doubt and confusion into them. So I constantly tell them when I realize this, you are my beloved son, because I want them to know and trust that. So when I say, man, you are God's son, they already have that relationship that they've trusted and believed in, because I've set that example for them. But I can tell them far more than being my son, far more than being my daughter. You are God's son and God's daughter. That's who you are and whose you are. If they don't know who they are and whose they are, they're constantly trying to earn your love and affection. And you cannot tell them about unconditional love that the Father has for them if they don't see that unconditional love in you first. And that begins with unconditionally letting them know they are your beloved son or daughter in that process. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about Mary Jo and where she's at, 1 and 3-year-old.
Yeah.
So that's really good news for her. But speak to the person who, like me, has a 16, 14, and 12-year-old and maybe hasn't reinforced that message, or those who maybe their kids are already out of the house and this is the first time that they're processing this.
Great question.
Is it too late?
Example. Spoke on this at a church in California, and the church, I mean, literally the men's leader says, Chuck, this is too powerful to miss. We're going to use our fellowship hall. We seat 240 at church, and we're going to invite the men in just for this, the Father's blessing. And so he had assembled spiritual fathers there, the lead pastor leading this, and spiritual fathers to speak this blessing over grown men who had never known it. And by the way, this happens every place I go. Men in their 70s, 80s, 40s, 50s, 20s, teens, okay? But in that process, right, out of the 240, when the invitation was given, all but about 12 of them, knowing what this night was about, came. One guy in particular, it was his 50th wedding anniversary. His wife told him, you go to that. We'll celebrate some other time. This is so important for you. The next day, right, I get a call. I'm doing teaching there for the leaders. Guy said, so-and-so wants to meet you and have a conversation. You got to be very careful with that. I said, yeah, I've got all day to meet with him. I said, okay, let's do this. Let's meet at 5:00 with him. I've got a meeting at 6. I can do that, and just setting boundaries. He says, ever since I became a Christian, I've known there was something more. I didn't know what it was, and no one ever taught me about it till last night. He was in his 70s. First name, I'll tell you, Bob. Last name, no. He said, when I knelt down, and by the way, it was a guy in his 50s that had been really trying to help him process this sonship, knelt down, laid his hands on him. A meaningful touch, a spoken word, attach high value, foresee a special future, and a commitment to that. He says, something changed in my life. And he said, but I've never done this for my 3 kids that are all married with kids. I said, buddy, listen, are they close? We were in California. He said, no, they're hours away in 3 different directions. Couldn't be 4 unless they were, out in the water. And I said, well, until you can see him at a holiday, Bob, man, I would call him over the phone and speak that blessing. Let God do it. He said, Chuck, don't worry about us. He said, I just wanted to thank you. My wife and I were up till 2:00. She's on the phone now. We're already packed. She's telling them we're coming. I'm going to go bless my children and my grandchildren, right there. And we're staying until they know they were blessed. It's one thing to bless somebody, but they got to know they were blessed. You know what I mean? All right. In that process, he said, then we've already told the other kids we're coming to see him. I'm going to pray a blessing, my wife and I, over our children and our grandchildren. We're not going to go on without this. And he did that. I had a case of somebody close to me. Father was unable, they were unable to get there. Father read the book. We wrote a book, Men of Honor, Women of Virtue, that talked about the power of the rites of passage with this blessing. And she had never truly heard this individual, her dad, say, you know, I love you. I'm so proud of you. There was this assumed in there, right?
Yep.
And called and said, I just need to bless you over the phone till I see you. So for you, now you've got 2 sons in the house, Daniel.
Yep.
Okay. There's not just the blessing of them as your son, but one of the critical stages that young men and young ladies look for is that blessing into the next season of their life as adults. And that's what the rites of passage is about. So we've got to nurture these young disciples in a sense, but we've got to bring them into that adult phase of their life, and for them to have their own faith, not just be living on mom and dad's faith, which is one reason so many of the young people walk away. They lived on their mom and dad's faith at church, and they were good and obedient, but they walked away from that faith because we didn't have an intergenerational community, in a sense, that helped them and gave them permission to ask tough God questions to find their own faith.
I want to shift a little bit, Chuck, because I know we've been talking a lot about the parental aspect of it, but moving forward with like church culture and how this is such an intergenerational question. I know this is a little bit of a 2-parter, so hang with me for a second. And I am an internal processor, so you can help me out as I go. But we think about mentors in the church, and which is beautiful. It's a great thing. I know that when I was in youth group, we had small group, and that was kind of our intergenerational aspect, I think, of the youth group, because youth group is youth all together. And so having small groups allowed us to meet with the 20s, 30s, 30-year-olds to have faith conversations with them. However, this is where it gets a little personal for me, but I like to think that this is a surprise to you because of my charm and wit that you see now. But as a teenager, I was definitely the shy one. I was socially afraid, and I was angsty, and I don't think I really wanted anything to do with like reaching out to have those conversations. So this is the question for me, I guess, as the church, thinking about intergenerational relationships, discipleship, mentorship. How do we, as the older generations, how do we reach the youth, those that are maybe more bubbly and charismatic, but also those that are socially afraid and angsty? Because they are the wallflowers, and they're harder to read. They're harder to reach. And I'm just curious, there's different spectrums on who feels comfortable talking to the adults and who feels a little more shy, and it takes longer for the generations to be able to reach them.
And adults that feel uncomfortable talking to youths.
Right. Yeah, that's
both
true.
Ways, absolutely.
We talk about the battlefield, the things that we're trying to work on in an intergenerational culture. We tend to think in church, we just do this, then we'll do this, then we'll do this. That's called consecutive. Okay, we're going to fight these battles on a consecutive. We'll win this, then we'll win this. Well, we've got to learn to fight concurrently across the spectrum, not consecutively across the spectrum. So at the same time, we're talking about young people, right? And what we do there, man, we've got to look very, very hard at what this means for our older adults. We're trying to work with that older generation to tell them, and we do this through a seminar. It says, if you passed your baton, take it back. And the reason for this is, let's go to the seniors for just a second, because if we can ignite them, it's going to change everything else, right? And the reason we are very much against passing the baton is the fact when a runner passes the baton, they have to quit running, they have to get off the track, and they're told to stay out of the race. They're done. Now, we go into churches, and the pastor will say, man, they've just disconnected. And I said, who's told them to pass the baton? And seniors will tell you, the encore will say, we were told it was somebody else's turn. It's time to pass the baton. And we've done it. So we're giving them back. But here's the thing. Here's why it's the encore. Great performance. 3 things about an encore. Great performers are ready for the encore. They know what they're going to do because all their life has prepared them for it. And they know this is what they're going to be remembered for. So when we can help this older generation understand, this isn't about spiritual hospice in the church. This is about your encore. You have the opportunity to make the greatest impact and have the greatest difference for the kingdom than you've ever had. Mm-hmm. So we've got to open the doors for that. Well, we did a seminar and some stuff in a church, and we had the pastor there, a younger pastor, one of these millennial types, you know what I mean?
But they are crazy.
They are. There's so much work to be done there. Okay, but in any event, not as much work as there is with whatever we want to call whatever the church calls the older ones, right? Because, by the way, the older ones are stepping away and they're segregating themselves using the same strategy that was taught back in the 80s and 90s for youth ministry. Get them as far away from the rest of the church and even call it a youth church. Got it? The seniors, we call the encore, have done the same thing in the churches, only they can get away with it because they paid all the bills and built the church. Yeah. Okay, so they can make those demands. But here's the deal. You ready? So we've got to help them understand this opportunity that they have to make it. But the young pastor had to apologize to a church. Didn't have to. God moved on him and he says, I need to apologize and ask forgiveness to everyone in here that I've told you over and over, we've got to reach a younger generation. Because I've realized in saying that, I've told you, you need to get out of the way. There's no greater lie out there. We need you now more than we ever had to create the kind of church that God wants us to be. Yeah. So it's on both ends of the spectrum in that sense, and everything in the middle, okay, for that we've got to bring this process together. But let's talk about the intergenerational community for just a second. Mm-hmm. One, we have to know the why. Before we talk about the what, the why is important. Why is it important to have an intergenerational culture? I mean, what's the win on this that we can't get? Because everything you've talked about with the youth leaders and stuff, Mary Jo, okay, when you said sticky faith, Daniel, you said, yeah, the 4 or 5 people. Look, that survey was out, that study was out over 25 years ago. And it said simply, before there was sticky faith, before there was orange, before there was a chosen generation, there was these surveys out there and said, look at this. The young people that continue to walk in their faith, not their parents. And they said, stay in the church, but you got to run it, right? They looked at all kinds of characteristics, but here's one of those characteristics. The number of intergenerational relationships besides their parents and youth leaders. Take parents and youth leaders away, because sometimes the parents, they don't do anything to keep them in church. The youth leaders are keeping them in youth group, and sometimes back in those days, building their own church. It was the number of other people in the church that showed value to them. You understand? And so when you saw that, right, that value added is what gave them identity, made them feel they were part of God's family because they saw themselves part of the church family. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, think about this. If you've ever changed church because one, you've been thrown out of one, or you've moved, or whatever, the toughest time ever to find a good church is when you're leaving one that you felt loved, identified with, and were a part of. Mm-hmm. And you got to look for the same thing to keep going. Yeah. Why do you think young people leave their youth group and can't find a church? That was their church. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're looking for something like it where they had it. And how many times have you heard people refer to big church? It's one of the heartbreaking things I ever heard. What the heck is big church? Oh, that's where all the older people get to go to church and hear the music they want to hear. And then when the others, and think about it, the older church people are perfectly happy because they think it's normal for young people to leave the church, get all beat up, get damaged, and then come back to the church for healing. Because many of them, that's what happened to them. Okay, there's nothing normal about kids leaving the church. Nothing normal whatsoever. We got to get away from that mentality. So what we have to do is look at the why, is because it establishes identity, value, feeling of family, and a safe place for them to grow strong, and that their problems are real, right? And people, don't want to just tell them, get over it, we did type of thing. Yeah. Well, how do you do that? Why does that intergenerational community and the things that they've identified in just survey, study after study. And these aren't necessarily faith-based studies, by the way, right? These are what they're pulling from across our entire society. But things like testimonies, life stories, shared memories, and in the church, family and church narratives, to know how this came about and to hear people in this process, that they can identify with that. And like I said, all too often, people are telling their stories in this perfect church that I told you, my wife and I, we joined a church one time, by the way. There were about 8 other families standing up there. We were all in our suit and tie, so it was a while ago. And we listened to all these other families. They would hand the dad the mic, and he would tell this amazing story about how great their family was and how perfect. Well, my wife and I hadn't really spoken since we left the house. We quit speaking before. We had 2 boys. And, I couldn't figure out what her problem was. I got up, had coffee, and read the paper why she couldn't get the boys ready, get them fed, get herself ready, and get them in the car on time. I mean, I don't know what the problem was.
That was a real
But, Oh, yeah?
Not that affects any Christians listening to this. But that was our story, and I was in a real growth process and being discipled by some guys that were trying to help me understand how stupid I was. Another issue. Bottom line, though, we get there and we listen to all of these perfect Christian stories. They handed me the mic. My wife will tell you the same story. I started off by saying, you know what? I don't know about all of these families here, but we hardly speak sometime before we get to church. We're just happy to be at a safe place where we can be real with who we are and so forth, and I just laid it out there. I said, we struggled this morning just getting here, and we're joining the church, right? My wife is standing behind me through this with the most beautiful smile, precious as she can be. Mary Jo, you might identify with this when your husband, well, you're perfect, so your husband's perfect, so you've never experienced it. But other families have. When your husband's saying something stupid like that, they're like, nobody needs to know that. We've got our own struggles. She's standing behind me with a perfect smile going, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. Before we get home, this man will die. I'll drive the boys home. I'm going to kill him. We all come off the platform, and she says, it happens every time. There was about 5 or 6 young moms come up to her, several with tears, going, you're the only one that we understood. That's been our life. How did you get through that? Right? She didn't want to kill me, but she really wasn't too happy with me because we hadn't spoken yet. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But, there's that growth process in there that, just being real and being safe in the church. I want to come back on the intergenerational, that part with the kids, okay? Because that was a church. We started a men's group where I brought a 2nd grader and a 4th grader to be around other men. One of the things that I've identified, intergenerational, we know the why. They need to hear stories and testimonies, all of those things. How do you get those when somebody's very, very shy? Yep. They're not going to interact with youth group and things like that. One of the things I want to tell parents is you start introducing them to your friends, because very often the one that's shy in their youth group feels far more comfortable being with older people. Just being allowed to be there, they are more comfortable being around older people than they are in the youth group with those games there and stuff like that, right? One of the things that hit me when I was writing the book was how important my friends were to my sons and my daughter. And I realized that. And I wrote a chapter talking about releasing my friends to be my kids' friends. There's a story with Bill McCartney, the former coach at Colorado, who just passed away. Amazing story with him. A man that I've known, another man I've known since we met in January of 1966. By most standards, that's a pretty good friendship, and it's lasted through all kinds of seasons. Bottom line on that, who better to be a friend of your shy daughter, hypothetically, if there was one, Mary Jo?
Yeah, it's hypothetical.
Didn't feel real comfortable in that youth group, playing their games and their questions. Who better to be a friend to my shy daughter or my son than friends of mine who I've already vetted to know they're trustworthy? Because if they're my friends, believe me, they're trustworthy. Got it?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of men I wanted to be. That's what I did. I introduced my sons then, and I allowed them to be friends. And there's some amazing stories. And I've had this happen at our church. So you look for those opportunities in that, because that's when you've got to really, sometimes you got to train some older people, say, look, they say, what am I going to do with them?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they need encouragement and training in the process too. And that's where the little C church comes as a part of the big C church that encompasses everything on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah. I had, just thinking back on my own story, there were several adults that made a huge impact on my faith when I was little. And some of them were my parents' friends, and then some of them were volunteers in our youth group. And I could think of a few, Tom and Brent in particular, who I got really close to and could talk to them about life stuff and faith stuff. And and then later in life, my mentor, Robert, and these were all men outside of my family that I connected with and learned from and grew with. And so thinking through that research of those key adults in someone's life who walk with you outside of your family, that was such a beautiful and important part of my story. I did notice, Chuck, and I kind of wanted to pull out and emphasize this. You've mentioned quite a few times a safe place. Yeah. These are vetted and trustworthy adults, because one of the huge issues in the church in general, specifically as it relates to intergenerational ministry, is there has been a lot of abuse, and there's organizations like Ministry Safe that exist now that make such a huge difference in that. Yeah. But that seems pretty important to what you're describing. So is there anything else you would add to what you've said about why a safe place is so important, and what that looks like?
You bet. Boy, what a great and a very, very important point that has to be made. I stepped in as an interim pastor, and within a 2-month period, I had 3 background investigations. Okay, because each place had former church. I spoke to youth. You cannot speak to the youth unless they do a quick background. Right there, I stepped in as the interim pastor. You couldn't be there in any role whatsoever in leadership without a background investigation there. And then I became an assistant football coach only for character for a high school. The high school had to run the whole thing background. So 1, physically, spiritually, and emotionally safe place. All different in that. The physical part of it, do not meet alone unless it's a public place. Okay? Do not meet alone unless it's a public place. Now, I do that from the football team. I do that with mentoring and coaching that I do. I do that within the church. Okay? Now, spiritually and emotionally, there are things that we have to train people on. So I would not introduce anybody to be a mentor or a coach or something, and we're doing a lot of this in our church, without specific training, how to ask questions, what are boundaries, what are questions that if you're going to do anything, should be asked of the parent first, okay? There's issues there, and so forth. I mean, a simple thing is, and I realize I coached high school football. I had a kid bang up his knee. Well, he wasn't going to be able to go to a game after that. I asked his mother first, 1, do you have a ride? I asked him. He said, no. I said, do you want to go to the game? Yes. I said, is your mom right there? I'm on the phone with him. He says, yeah, put her on the phone. Brenda, this is Chuck. You know me? I said, before I ask him anything, and this is a senior in high school, male, but there are still appropriate boundaries and that. And she said, Chuck, I would love it. I know you, friend to him, and I took him to the game. But I would not have done that with just some other team if I didn't know his parent or something like that. And just now they've changed the rules, by the way. I can't travel with one. There's all kinds of things. So that needs training. It needs a background investigation. And here's the other part of it. For mentors in a specific program, disciplers or encouragers in that are going to be meeting, there's ongoing training that we need to be a part of this thing. And look, anybody that will not submit themselves to a background investigation in a church, for example, or a school, frankly, I wouldn't trust them. Now, this is different. If I got a 20-year friend of mine that I have known, And my son, he says, hey, can I grab him, take him to a basketball game? Different issue. So you have multiple levels on this, and we've got to be respectful of the circumstances in which these are taking place and the conditions. And we have to honor that. And if we don't, we're dishonoring God.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I've seen a lot of research as well on how even background investigations often don't catch really important things, which is why organizations like Ministry Safe and others are so important for training leaders with any age kids and in any part of ministry. So thank you for drawing attention to that. So as I kind of think through some of the main points that you've drawn our attention to as it relates to intergenerational ministry, I want to throw these back out there. So you mentioned the importance of identity, both for us embracing it before and as we're passing it on to others. Maybe as we pass it on is better, because I don't know that I still have my identity figured out sometimes. And that identity is defined as knowing who we are and whose we are, which is beloved children of God. Connecting to other adults, but knowing the why behind that first. And that why is because of the importance of perspective, of sharing different stories and testimonies, the sticky faith type of concept we talked about of having other mentors in their life, the importance of prayer, the importance of modeling or praying for our younger people in our lives, modeling for them what life looks like, the appropriate places to invite them into intergenerational community, but also the appropriate places that they don't need to be in those spaces. Introducing them to your friends, creating a safe place, which we talked about, using even the phone or text message as an opportunity to bless others if we can't get in touch with them in person. And then just the importance of prayer and blessing over people. And then maybe the last one that I see on the list that I wrote, at least, and Mary Jo added, if I missed, was sharing honestly, including brokenness. So not avoiding brokenness, but sharing honestly. Did you have any others that...
No, I will say, going off of the sharing honestly thing, I think that in a different conversation in the future someday, not right now, but that goes into, for me as well, speaking on mental health. And I know that intergenerationally, there's been growth. I grew up in the 90s, and there's a lot of mental health in my family, and we dealt with it well within our family. But I know there was a strong feeling in the church that you can't talk about it. So when you were talking about the intergenerational conversations, and even when you were standing up in front of the church and you spoke honestly about the way you guys sometimes enter the church service, having not talked to each other, that honesty and vulnerability, I think, is something that can reach the different generations right now as well. Modeling how to speak about your own mental health in a healthy way, not in a dumping way, but in a healthy way, to share that model for the younger generations that are struggling so much more, I think, than as a whole than we have in the past. So I didn't have anything to add as a bullet point. That was a good one. I think but just to go off of that one. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. And Chuck, I wonder, one of the things you've mentioned several times is the importance of prayer and blessing. And I wonder if, to close our conversation, if you'd be willing to pray a blessing over all those who will listen to this or watch this. And if you could, that would be a great way to, I think, end this conversation.
Yeah. I would love to be there with everybody listening to this so I could lay a hand on them and to affirm them in the process. But spiritually, as we do this, for each person listening to this, that you may hear this not from me or a podcast, is may you hear the words of a loving Father speaking this to you, to say, you are my beloved son or daughter, you're my beloved child. That through the blood of Jesus Christ, you are literally adopted into the family of God. And I speak that blessing over you, that you would know that you are brother and sister with everyone in the family of God through Jesus Christ, his sacrifice that has brought us that that portal to our Heavenly Father in ways we could never have known it before. I speak the blessing that you were not created by accident, that you didn't just happen, nothing in the cosmos, but you were created by God who knew you before he formed you in your mother's womb. He created you for a purpose and a destiny. You have a reason to be alive in this kingdom, that you have been gifted. There are things poured into you with a combination unlike any other person that God, our Creator and Heavenly Father, has ever done in anyone else. You are one of a kind. God sees you as one of a kind. I bless you as one of a kind, as a son or a daughter of the King. Walk in the fullness of who you are and whose you are. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck.